Hey, welcome to this guide about how to use the Huns and the Mongol cultures in the Humankind game. And we're going to be mainly focused on the Humankind or the maximum difficulty here, playing against the AI. I haven't really tried them against other players or lower difficulties, although most of the lessons or information that I discuss here probably will be helpful under those circumstances as well. So the Huns and the Mongols have this special unit, the Hunnic Horde, as well as the Mongol Horde, which are sort of a nomadic unit here that you can see that similar to the tribe that you have at the early game, by feeding them actually grows additional units for free, which is quite helpful. So in this guide, we'll sort of start with a bit of an overview, then we'll discuss how to actually recruit these units. We'll talk about sort of religious tenets as well as civics that are helpful in the war and to be able to maximize the quality and impact of these units. We'll talk about sort of how to attack empires and when to do that, how to find the money and the food to keep paying and feeding these units and growing more of these units. And then we'll also talk about sort of war strategy as well as battle tactics with the Hunnic and the Mongol Horde. So we'll start off with a bit of an overview. So the Huns are sort of a classical era culture and the Mongols are medieval era culture that are broadly very similar, although the Mongols of course are a little bit more powerful compared to the Huns, being a little bit of a later culture. So they both provide this special sort of horde unit, which you don't have to build or buy in a city. It's one of the only units that you can actually recruit with influence, which we'll discuss a little bit more next. And you can also grow additional units here through ransacking, which is a unique mechanic as well. And these units are actually ranged units that can move after attacking. And that unlocks some special battle tactics that make it very hard to fight these guys, especially if there are lots of them in a particular battlefield that is of a reasonable size. Now, the speed with which you can recruit these, as well as how fast they move around the map, has a big impact and gives you a massive advantage. Where you can win was even if they're not anywhere near as powerful in terms of combat strength as the enemy is, right? So, for example, we're going to be attacking the Mayans here, and it says we are much less powerful than them, but we're going to easily win this war. In fact, there's a stream already where I've done this that you can actually watch on YouTube if you are so inclined. The sort of disadvantage that the Huns and the Mongols have is that you can actually not attach these outposts to your city. So this action is not prohibited, which is one of the penalties that you have. So all of your empire is going to be focused on war, and you're going to have a very, very poor economy because you aren't able to grow your cities significantly. You'll have to make up for that by, taking territories from enemy units and then later on using that territory to build a much more powerful economy and come back and overtake the AI. Okay, so now let's move on to how to actually recruit these units. And there's sort of 5 ways of doing it. 2 of the ways are of building it in your cities, right? Using either industry or by purchasing the unit. Now, that's probably one of the worst ways of doing it, because there's actually much better ways of doing it using influence that I'll show you. The other way that you can get at least the Mongol hordes is by upgrading these units. But again, it's very expensive, and this money is better saved as a sort of buffer to be able to be negative money for a few turns. Whilst your units are sort of preparing and getting to the front and starting to do a bit of ransacking, right? So I would not recommend upgrading your units, and instead just disband them into your cities so that you can keep having traders and researchers in your cities. Now, the best way of using it was actually by getting them is through influence, because if we look at one of this outposts here that has 5 population in it, there's actually this special way of purchasing the Mongol hordes using just 149 influence, which takes all of the population out of it. But then we have this, army that's ready to go and attack enemies with just a little bit of influence, right? And we can do that over and over, assuming that the outpost has sufficient population to be able to do it. So then what you will want to make sure is to have outposts with significant food surpluses, right? And there are many ways of doing this. One of the really powerful ways is to actually build harbors using influence. So see how we can put down a horse ranch using influence, right? While in each territory that can build a harbor, you can do the same as well without actually attaching the outpost or the territory to your city, because you can see I've built a harbor here, and this territory has never been attached to any of my cities, right? Costs around sort of 50 influence, which is also not very expensive. So it's a really good way. And the harbor is sort of one of the best, situationally can be one of the best districts or quarters in the game, because it you can see that it not only exploits all the tiles adjacent to it, it actually has one additional radius where it's also exploiting this tile. It's not exploiting this tile, but it is exploiting this tile, which is sort of 2 tiles away from the harbor, right? So you can get a lot of food into your outposts using harbors that you can build with influence. The other thing that I would recommend doing to enhance that strategy is to actually pick the Respect the Seas Bounties tenet on your religion, because it actually adds +2 food on coastal water as well as the +2 food on lake, which makes this strategy even more powerful, right? And we'll also discuss some of the other tenets in a little bit later on. The other reason this is really powerful is because this population will grow back, and of course you've just freed up a lot of food surplus by taking the population out of here, so you'll actually regrow this population quite quickly, and then you can re-recruit some of these units quite quickly with just a little bit of influence, so you don't have to worry about losing these units very much. You of course want to keep them around as much as possible so that they get some good experience to make them even more powerful, but if you lose some of them, it's pretty easy to get them back. Now the last way that of course you can recruit them is actually through this by gathering food. Now I never found any food that was just on the map like you do in the early game, but you can get this food by ransacking administrative centers as well as outposts here, like this, and that'll grow the food a little bit, as well as you can attack enemy armies that usually have at least some food in them, and get food that way. If you attack with multiple armies, the food sort of gets distributed equally among them. Okay, let's now talk about sort of what religious tenets and civics are actually good to help boost your war effort. So given that we've already started to talk about the religion, let's look at some of the other ones. So Respect the Seas Bounties is very helpful with growing food. The Smite the Unbelievers is actually not very good for the Huns and the Mongols, because you're not going to be creating units on cities. It's not really anything good here. But at this tier you can get a little bit of extra production to help make your cities that little bit better. And then the most important one, which we haven't unlocked yet but we'll get to very shortly, is actually just meditate often, because it gives you extra combat strength on your units, which sort of negates some of the penalties that you have when playing on the Humankind difficulty. Basically the AI gets a +2 combat strength bonus, so if you pick this tenet, you make up for that. Now, usually I get this sort of fourth tier around the early medieval era. It'll happen fairly soon, which is good. Now, the other in the civic tree, let's see if all of them are actually here. Yeah. So the first one that you want to focus on is actually in this army composition to pick professional soldiers to gain that little bit of extra combat strength on your units. This helps again mitigate some of the advantages that the AI actually has, and together with the religion actually then gives you a sort of bonus above the AI. The other thing that's really important to pick is actually, and we'll do this, we haven't done it yet, is to pick this plundered wages for the army wages, because it boosts the money you get from ransacking, as well as giving you a little bit of a combat bonus, which increases the speed at which you ransack, because basically everything has a certain amount of fortification, and you reduce that fortification based on the combat strength of the unit that are performing the ransacking. So the +4 combat strength helps speed that up a little bit and frees up your units a little bit earlier. Now, let's move on to talking about when to actually attack enemies, right? Now, purchasing these two units has actually pushed me quite negative in terms of money, right? I'll be able to make up for that a little bit by sticking these units into the city, right? And then employing them as traders instead, because it reduces the costs that I have to pay for the upkeep here, gets me more traders. Now in this case I had to move them actually and make them farmers, but this will keep growing and they can come back as scientists or researchers, right? And I'm building some more farmers quarters here, which will free up some of these units. The other thing to keep in mind is that you will be ransacking your enemy quite a bit, and that will get you quite a bit of money to keep paying your army's wages. So I wouldn't worry about being negative money here, assuming that you're not going to use these as a standing army. It's quite a waste to do that. So you want to be attacking and taking outposts. Now you will want to save up a little bit of a buffer here to make sure that you can survive a few turns of having negative money. Okay. The other thing that I wouldn't worry too much about is, like I said before, we're going to attack the Mayans here. And it says we are much less powerful than them, but it doesn't really bother me very much. Because these Hunnic Horde, or these Mongol hordes, are actually way more powerful than indicated by their combat strength, and the only thing that this sort of takes into account is actually your aggregate combat strength, right? Losing one of these armies usually would be really, really bad, but with the Mongols, it doesn't really matter. You pay 150 influence, and then whoop, it's back, right? And in the background, all of your outposts just keep growing more and more and more armies. Like here, I can recruit another stack next turn. Here, I'll be able to do that pretty soon as well. So I wouldn't really worry about enemies' empires being much more powerful than you. It's pretty easy to win the war anyway. And the other thing is that the way that these units actually work in a battle means that they are much more powerful than enemy units as well. And we'll get to show you that in a little bit as well. Okay. Yeah, so, and all of these advantages that I was just discussing, the Mayans won't have. So, and those advantages are worth a lot, and they don't get accounted for in sort of this metric here. Okay, I'll come back in a minute when I've advanced this a little bit more to show you some more of the practicalities. We'll start talking about sort of how to keep getting enough money and food to keep growing, but I want to sort of show it to you rather than talking about it theoretically. So I'll be back in one moment. Okay, now on to war strategy. what we'll see happen next turn here is actually that we're going to be ransacking this outpost, and you can see that we made 200 gold here, right, which makes up for the significant money per turn that we're actually losing here. The other thing that it actually does is that so the Mayans have been losing war support because they keep losing battles against me over a number of turns, right? But whenever they lose outposts, they actually regain some of that war support, which means that the war can keep going for longer, allowing you to keep ransacking more and more of these administrative centers, outposts, and so on, right? So those are some of the two things that you want to do. So you want to make sure that you keep ransacking these outposts, right, to get both the money as well as the food here, which grows additional food in these armies, as well as keep paying for the money that it actually costs. The other thing that you'll want to do is actually keep some units here that are not nomadic around as well, to put down the outposts for the areas that you've just ransacked. Because if you put down outposts with these horde units, they actually all go into the outpost straight away, and then you have to pay the influence cost to actually get them back out again. So that's why you want to keep some highly mobile other kind of units around. Okay. The other thing that you'll want to do is delay taking enemy cities. So there's an enemy city right here and right here, because I know I've played out this war a number of times. And we'll want to delay taking these cities as long as possible, because whenever you take a city from the enemy, they actually get a war support reduction per turn from that point onwards, which means that basically, unless they keep winning fights or you ransack a lot of their administrator centers very quickly, the war will end quite quickly, and you might not want that to happen. Now, you will want to make sure to actually research these technologies that give you as much extra city caps as possible, because the end goal is to actually take their cities away from them, right? Now, when you are getting close to winning the war, which is basically when their war support is going to 0, you will want to be in a position where either on that turn or on, close to those turns, you can actually take out one of their cities and take it over, so that you can actually ask for that city in the war resolution. If you don't occupy a city, you can't actually ask for it in the war resolution. So that's what you want to be keeping in mind if you are getting close to winning the war, because you keep winning battles or they keep retreating away from you, is to be in a position where you can actually take one more than your city cap cities away from them, right? Because being one over the city cap is just a penalty of 10 influence per turn, which is not very big, but another one actually significantly increases the penalty. So you can afford to be one city over, but not much more than that. So yeah, that's sort of the war strategy that you want to follow. Basically, keep ransacking their territories to get money and food, to grow more units, and keep being able to pay for your army. And then when you get close to winning the war, you'll want to take out as many of their cities and occupy them as you can actually hold reasonably. So I'll be back in a little bit to discuss battle tactics. Okay, so welcome back. We'll now discuss battle tactics. Now, sequentially, this is a little bit earlier because I'm just taking this opportunity, but these lessons still apply. Now, this army has already retreated, so I know that attacking it means that I'll force them to play. Now, the first thing that you'll actually want to look at is see what kind of ground you give your enemies by attacking from various angles, because their deployment zone will actually differ depending on where you attack them from, right? So if I attack them from here, they get some of this elevated territory over here to deploy on. Whereas if I was to attack them from here, right, they are all going to be having to deploy in lower elevations, right? But the other thing that I'm noticing here is that this unit is actually not in the deployment zone, so it's going to count as reinforcements rather than actually be deployable at the start of the game. So what I'll want to do is put this unit right here and then attack like this to give me all of this sort of higher ground that I can attack them from. So we'll do this. Right. And then now let's talk about sort of deploying. What you'll want to do is make sure that if you are the attacker, you want to get as close as possible to the enemy to be able to use the least amount of movement to sort of get in range. Now, if I was defending, this would be a different story, right? What I would be wanting to do is occupy all of this area that's sort of elevated, right? So I would want to deploy something like this so that any enemy attacks have to come from lower elevations, right? So this would mean that for them to attack me with close quarter units, they'd have to attack uphill. If they have range units, which they do here, they'd have to shoot uphill as well, right? So this is a really, really good deployment if I'm the defender. If I'm the aggressor, I get to move after attacking anyway. So it doesn't matter where I deploy these units as long as it's as close as possible to the enemy units, so that getting in range for the attack is the smallest amount that sort of is possible, right? So we'll end our deployment right here. Now you can see that they have deployed mostly in some of this lower ground here, right? And they've actually done a reasonably good job in deploying. Now they have given me these 2 tiles to attack from an elevation into both of these units, but I don't have any elevated areas to attack these from, so my combat strength is going to be lower, right? Now the most dangerous units that they actually have here is not these horse units, they're pretty weak, but is actually these ranged units. So I'm going to be focusing on killing them first. And the best way to do this is actually to move this unit over here and then attack from up here, because I get the +4 combat strength from higher ground, right? So that maximizes the damage. Now, I don't want to keep occupying this tile because other units will want to go here and shoot down on this unit. So instead, I will actually want to withdraw this unit back to hold down this sort of ridge line here, or this elevated territory, right? And move it as far back as possible to give these other units some of the closer tiles. So I'm going to move this unit right here, which is as far back as possible as I can move it. Now, next I'm going to take this unit, put it here, also attack, and again then withdraw it. Now this unit can only go to here, and I think with this unit I'm going to have a hard time actually getting it onto any of these tiles. So I'm not going to be going over here to attack with these, because then I give up my higher ground advantage, which you'll see play out when we actually pass the turn to them. So instead I'm going to have to go to this tile, attack from here, and then withdraw this unit back down here. I also need to get a unit onto this tile. Well, I can get this unit onto that tile as well. So we can repeat that, attack these guys again, and then actually move this unit back a bit, so to leave this sort of closer tile open for another unit. For example, for this unit, which has to go three distance before it can attack, and then it can take up maybe this tile as a defense. So this will allow me to almost kill this unit and then move up here. Now I'm going to use this unit to do some more damage to here, and then retreat this unit up to ridgeline here. Now some of these units that are further away, I shouldn't move as far, because otherwise I'm going to leave myself open to attack and at lower elevations. And having just one unit here has an impact that their units will move next to this unit rather than having to be next to this sort of elevation line here, right? Making all of these attacks worse, as well as exposing one of my units to some really strong attacks. So I'm gonna take this unit, move it here, and actually just do damage to this unit, and then withdraw it up here, and then finally sort of take this unit over here, do an attack. Now in this case, let's say that I couldn't reach this tile here, I can still actually move some of these units even after I've stopped moving them, right, to free up another easy tile for this to retreat on. So right now I'm pretty happy with this setup because I'm holding down all of this elevated ground here, right, and they're going to have to attack me from lower areas, which means that these archers are going to be worse. They're going to have a lower combat strength and do less damage, and these close quarter units have to attack up the hill, which means they'll take a lot more damage. So let's end our round, end our turn here, and see what happens. Okay. So you can see that this had to attack uphill and did very minimal damage to my units. And the other thing that you can actually see here is that they were forced to move into very favorable positions for me, right? Because I get an elevated attack down on them without a lot of movement. And they're going to, all of this will keep working for the next turn. So let's start with focusing down this unit, which is now, because it had to move and it's actually in fairly open territory, I'm going to be doing a lot of damage to this unit. And then I will move this unit out of the way and also do another attack here, which will probably kill this unit and move it out of the way. So now I just have these two units left, which are very weak. So I'm going to go here, take a shot on them, and move this back, and then use one of these units to kill this unit. And then these two units should be enough to actually kill off this last unit down here. So you can see that we won that fight with very, very minimal damage that we took on our Mongol hordes. We used the fact that we can shoot and move to force them to attack me in advantageous territory. Yeah, that fight was really, really easy, and we only got 2 units slightly damaged, right? So that's why these units are so powerful, because you can do damage to enemies, you can dictate the part of the territory that you will actually fight in, and the AI typically moves its units to actually be able to attack you. So that's another thing that you can take advantage of, right? Like, they could have held back and just held down their territory wherever their flag was, and I would have had to come to them, which I would have been happy to as well, because I can move, attack, and then move out of their range, right? And then they can't do anything against me. But yeah. So I'll be back shortly with sort of the next topic, which will be a bit of a summary. Okay, so in summary, the Hunnic and Mongol hordes are really powerful. You can hold back many units. Now, you don't want to get into a battle where you are outnumbered, because that's a really hard battle to win. But as long as the enemy has fewer units than you, you can quite easily win battles. And through your superior mobility, you can actually pick the terrain and sort of isolate enemy armies and win battles that way. Now, so you can recruit them by going to your outposts. You can see this outpost has regrown its population, so I could just purchase another Mongol horde right here.
Political force can be projected across the oceans.
Now, that's kind of embarrassing that it thought that this is actually a ship, but anyway, we'll ignore that. You can keep growing food by building harbors and by ransacking enemy tiles like we've done here, and that will actually get you additional food. Make sure that you maximize your money income, but also don't worry too much about a negative money per turn. because you can keep ransacking, and the reals from ransacking, when you combine it with certain civics, are actually quite decent. And you also want to keep going after these enemy outposts, ransack them, and then put your own outposts using your non-nomadic units down, because the nomadic units kind of just go into the outpost, and then you have to re-recruit the units, which is not great. You also, in a given battle, you'll want to use elevation to sort of dictate where a particular fight is going to happen on the map, and force the enemies basically to attack you uphill as much as possible. So there you go. I know it was quite a bit of information to take in, but I hope that tells you about how to maximize the impact, or the things that you can get from the Huns and the Mongols, which are quite fun to actually play with, because you're taking stuff away from other people, which is, at least in sort of games, is quite fun. Anyway, thanks for watching, and until next time, bye.